All right, in 3, 2. Actually, hang on. Let me move this again. Right. In 3, 2. Yo, what's going on, everybody? It is Fabs here, and we are back with the Believe Fantasy Football Show. Myself, your friendly neighborhood fantasy football analyst, and the one, the only, the legendary king. The man has been doing fantasy football since Alfred Winkenbach. If you don't know who that is, go look it up. It's Bob Harris. What's going on, pal?
It's going fantastic. Always like it when you bring up the GOPL, the Greater Oakland Pigskins Prognosticator League, the very first documented fantasy football league, early 60s.
That's right. Yep.
Great story, by the way. They were all affiliated with the Oakland Raiders. They were either in ownership or covered the team for a living. Some of the big names in there, Scotty Sterling, went on, became semi-famous as a basketball GM, etc. There, Ron Wolf was an assistant to one of the managers, the great Packers GM. So, really fascinating story. And I think the thing that amazes me the most is I have all the documentation, all their original rules and charters, and
weren't kickers like really valuable and tackles really valuable?
Yeah, so they had interesting rules. I think just, not to get too far in the weeds here, but the thing that amazed me was when you read through the bylaws, the little blurbs and things, it's exactly the same as it is now. The arguments they got into, I think, the things, the conditions they set, the smack they talked, it was fantastic. I've talked to, there was a point where I talked to pretty much every living owner who played in that league, and it was really interesting to talk to all of them.
Yeah, go back and look at it if you're into fantasy football or if you just like NFL type history. That's certainly a good thing to go check back on. We've got to look ahead to the future here. And unfortunately, the future is bleak for a lot of us in the fantasy football world. Before we get into that, Bob, all the major sports are in action this week with college football playoffs ready to kick off. BetOnline is your number one destination for all your sports wagering info, including news for pro football, the NBA, upcoming fights, NHL games. All of it. Head to the website today to get into the action and see all the updated odds for the week. Remember to use promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet online where the game starts. Bob, it's not like we haven't already had our share of injuries, but now going into the first week of the playoffs, and we're going to talk about this list. We've got a bunch of guys who have been very good for us who are not going to be available or might not be available. And it's going to make it even rougher from a fantasy perspective. We'll start at the quarterback position. Thursday Night Football. No Justin Herbert. He is out for the season with an injured finger on his throwing hand.
This is not good, right? Ethan Stick will move in for him, and we're going to have serious issues there. Stick has not started since his college days, so that's probably not a good sign either. And, not having all his components, Keenan Allen, I know we'll talk about that as well, but this just doesn't seem like an ideal setting. And the Raiders defense, by the way, has been improving. I think, the perception in our head, we remember the first thing we see and the first thing we see maybe is the Raiders, or the first thing that comes to mind is the Raiders not a good defense. Ask the Minnesota Vikings. And by the way, if you're the Raiders defense, how mad are you that you only allow 3 points and you lose a game?
Yeah, I know. And the Raiders defense is a very good streaming option this week.
Yes.
If you're into that kind of thing.
Like to pick on the quarterbacks, right, Fabs? That's what,
right. That's how you do it. And we've got a lot of quarterbacks this week that are backups, or third stringers like Tommy DeVito, who's been pretty good lately. CJ Stroud is very questionable for this week. So we could see Davis Mills under center. And speaking of the Texans, Nico Collins is banged up too. So we've got to find out whether or not we're going to have him at running back. Josh Jacobs for the Thursday night game. Not sure if he's going to play. Zamir White, Amir Abdullah would be the audibles in that case. Neither one of them very exciting, even though the matchup's pretty good. Brian Robinson is dealing with a hamstring injury. And unfortunately, he may be out this week. We're going to find that out sooner rather than later. We could be seeing a lot of Antonio Gibson this week. If he's on the waiver wire, go pick him up. Alexander Madison's banged up at the running back position. But here are two of the big ones. First off, Keenan Allen's not playing. And I'm afraid, Bob, that this is the start of Keenan Allen being done for the season because the Chargers stink. They're out. They're not going anywhere. And why bring them back? I hope I'm wrong. And then Tyreek Hill, who I was at the game. He was tackled like what do they call it?
It was a combination. It was a combination horse collar with the hip drop. It was like the dual lethality move, and obviously very irritating. The NFL owners meetings this week, they're talking about eliminating the hip drop tackle as well. I mean, it's going to be difficult at some point that they have to tackle somehow. But nonetheless, he did not practice to open the week. They're going to have a hard decision to make at some point, right? They need to win. He wants to be on the field. I guarantee you, he's pushing for that 2,000-yard season. So, at some point, they're going to have to decide whether they need to rein him in for the betterment of the team. But also, the team wants to be better as well, and they have to push for the playoffs. So, going to be interesting to see where he's at by the end of the week.
And you said rein him in. I live in South Florida. It's literally going to rain every day through the weekend. So maybe it's going to stop by Sunday. So keep tabs. You never know what's going to happen, but like the forecast is literally like rain for the next few days. Let's get into this Chargers Raiders game on Thursday Night Football. The Raiders 3.5 point favorite. The total's 34. Another gross total. Last week it was 30. It did go over. The Chargers at plus 130 on the money line. Raiders at minus 155. I'm sure that's going to change. A few notes here on the wagering front. And I don't even know if these matter, Bob, because like Justin Herbert's not playing, but the Chargers are 5-8 against the spread. They're 3-3 against the spread at home. 5 of the 8 games have gone under, and 2 of the 4 have gone under on the road. The Raiders are 6-1 against the spread overall, 4-2 against the spread at home. So that's a good thing. 10 of the 13 games they've played have gone under. 6 of 7 have gone under at home. So 34, but we saw this last week and it went over. The Chargers are 10-7 against the spread against the Raiders since 2015. They're 5-3 against the spread against the Raiders on the road in that time. But again, it's kind of a different scenario, right? Justin Herbert's not going to play. Keenan Allen's not going to play. Josh Jacobs may not play. Devontae Adams all of a sudden has an illness. He's going to play. Outside of Austin Eckler, and I got to give you a stat on Austin that kind of surprised me, Bob. I mean, is there anybody else for the Chargers to start? Which, I mean, it's crazy to say because they have so much talent, but the injuries are just, it's a mash unit.
Right. And you compound that with the fact it's a Thursday game, right? So, do you want to be sitting there watching the rest of the games play out and see your other possibilities, exceed what you had in a game on Thursday, knowing that it's a diminished core? I think, in Eckler's case, last week we had all the talk that, it's going to be competition and we're going to see a lot of Joshua Kelly and Isaiah Spiller. We did not. Instead, Eckler had 49 snaps, went 100 yards of scrimmage, had a rushing touchdown. Spiller got 12 snaps. Kelly had 7 snaps. Eckler's best game in a month. So, I think you're still going to play him and hope for the best. But I'll just remind you that defense continues to improve. They're ranked 9th in the league in points allowed at 19.9 per game. And that's to teams with, semi-good quarterbacks. Maybe not last week notwithstanding, didn't work out well. But it's a struggle for me to want to really force pieces in here. I think Eckler, you're going to play. Beyond that, like Josh Palmer returns. If you were to, if your roster was super depleted, but I just think you're pushing it, right? He had 5 catches and 133 yards in week 7 against Kansas City before suffering his injury. So there's some high end there, but I don't know that I want to push that.
Yeah, it's going to be rough. Even Austin, and you're playing him because he's the only offensive weapon that they have that's established, right? He has scored fewer than 14 points in all but 2 of 13 career games against the Raiders. I was shocked when I saw that because you would have thought that Eckler would just smoke the Raiders because historically their defense has not been great. That's not been the case. He's given like low double digits on the average. Let's hope that that's going to be different on Thursday night. The Raiders have allowed the 7th most points to running backs, the 6th most rushing yards. Eckler's the only real solid play for the Chargers. You mentioned Josh Palmer. The Raiders have allowed the 10th fewest points to wide receivers and the 7th fewest to the slot. The Raiders are not a bad defense, folks. I know the Raiders, they stink. The defense is not that bad. It's not that bad. So, Palmer is a guy that if you're desperate or if you're in a 14-team league like I am, I got to play him. Quentin Johnson, same kind of thing. Gerald Everett, he's a playable asset because you lack weapons. The Raiders have allowed 8 tight ends to score 9+ points this season with 4 over 13. And when you're out Keenan Allen and, you're looking at Josh Palmer and Quentin Johnston as your top options, Bob Everett's going to be in the mix. So if you need a tight end, you could utilize him. Bob, what about the Chargers defense, right? We talk about how, you look at the quarterback, you got Aiden O'Connell. You might not have Josh Jacobs. You have Devontae Adams, who's sick. Are you in on the Chargers at all, or kind of this is just the Raiders?
I'm more into I don't know. I would play the Raiders defense. I'm probably not going to be in on the Chargers. I know it's not a ideal offensive situation. Probably last week I would have been perfectly fine playing. The week against New England I would have been perfectly fine. I don't know. this is, for me, this is like another thing where there's maybe one playable component on the other side. I mean, Zamir White, you could play for the Raiders, right? Assuming Josh Jacobs is inactive, thinking someone getting, 15 to 20 touches against this defense, running backs who do that are probably going to have some success. You're still going to play Devontae Adams because you're playing the volume, right? I mean, even if it's not been good, and I have some numbers there on him. I think over the last, his target shares over the last 4 weeks, 52, 34, 22, and 34%. He's only averaged 6.2 catches, 73 yards per game in those. He has 1 touchdown, no 100-yard games, but you have to, it's hard not to play that volume, right? So I'll probably be keeping him in lineups, but I have him ranked down in the, well into the wide receiver too. So set your expectations accordingly and look at your options accordingly.
Right. No question about that. So in Scott Fishbowl, which I'm still alive. I've had a really good season in Scott Fishbowl, but I'm about to get knocked out. Why? My wide receivers are Keenan Allen, Tyreek Hill among the top 2. No Keenan Allen. One of my top 2 running backs is Josh Jacobs. I'm not going to have him potentially. And if I do, maybe he's not going to be at 100%. Let's talk about Jacobs because the matchup's good. I mean, the Chargers have allowed the 6th most points to running backs, the 2nd most receiving yards to running backs. Problem is, even if Jacobs is active, like fear of re-aggravation or injury, and it makes it really hard to play him, right?
Right. The Thursday night game, you're going to be eyeballing you're going to be miserable as you watch your other possibilities play throughout the week. That's part of it. The Thursday night game plays into this mentally, at least. But also, I mean, objectively speaking, he is going into this game not healthy. So at that point, you assess your other options. And, I'm not, you know me, I'm the great injury agnostic. Well, that's what I'm drafting. When I'm setting lineups, I'm not so much, right? I want to play it a little more conservative and not take chances. But to my detriment, right? Last week, Breece Hall was a player who, I didn't sit, but I dialed back on a little bit, set my expectations down because he was dealing with an ankle injury. Didn't practice all week until Friday, limited work, came in, had a great game. So, there's a range of outcomes for all these players. I think in Jacobs' case, though, the short week and no practice at all, those are both concerning. And Zamir White, while I think it's a great opportunity, I might want to wait and see how, if I would prefer this if it were a Sunday game and I could see how some of the other things have played out up to that point before I rolled with it.
Yeah, and Amir Abdullah is going to also be in the mix as well. Let's go through a few player props here from Jen Piacenti over at Sports Illustrated. She likes Austin Eckler over 46.5 rushing yards in this game. How about this one, Bob? Easton Stick under half a touchdown. That's not good if you have Chargers assets. Devontae Adams over 67.5 receiving yards. That's at -110 over at SI Sportsbook. So check that out. But I think the Easton Stick under half a touchdown is interesting and depressing all at the same time. Let's talk about some DFS plays. Let's see if Bob agrees with some of these that I have. We'll start off with the quarterback bargains. I like Jordan Love against the Bucs at $6,200, even though last week was not good. Matt Stafford, though, how chalky is he going to be? He sticks $6,000 against the worst defensive league against quarterbacks, and he's been red hot the last 3 weeks.
In cash games, it's going to be hard to go away from him. In tournaments, maybe you want to pivot to differentiate, but in cash games, he's going to be,
all right, the chalkiest. Before we get into that, explain the difference to the folks out there, cash games against tournament.
So in cash games, you're playing head-to-head. You just need to beat half the field or one other person. You want to play the best possible lineup. You want to have some chalk in there because the other side is going to have a lot of chalk. In tournaments, the large pool tournaments, you want to have some different players in there. You need a little mix of chalk in there. There's going to be players that you want to have, but you want to catch some of the outliers and catch performers who aren't expected to do well to win the big money.
The fades at quarterback. Tua Tagovailoa is at $7,900 against the Jets. And it might be raining. No, thank you. And I got Patrick Mahomes on here against the Patriots, $7,800. I'm sorry. I don't care what his name is. I'm looking at the numbers, and the numbers have not been good. And the Patriots numbers against quarterbacks at home, phenomenal. So keep that in mind. The bargains at running back. Bijan Robinson's only $6,800 against the Panthers, man.
Like it.
Yeah, that's a good one. And then Zeke, $5,800 against the Chiefs. With that kind of volume that he had last week, if that continues, I don't see why it wouldn't. Giddy up.
Right. Running back has been the one piece you could count on. Running back's been one piece you could count on that offense.
Yep. Fades. If Aaron Jones plays, don't care. $6,500 is way too expensive against the Buccaneers, considering his lack of durability this season. James Conner against the Niners, $5,700, too expensive for me. Here's some bargains. Want to get your take on Terry McLaurin. He's $5,600 against the Rams. Squeaky wheel. Remember what he said after he had caught no passes and was targeted minimally in the game before the bye? He said, well, I got in some good cardio. Squeaky wheel here, Bob. You think Terry McLaurin's a good play?
I've been playing him most every week, and evidence to the contrary, Fabs. He has not been a good play. Like, I think he might be. Here's the confounding thing about him and Jahan Dotson. I'm looking right now. Terry McLaurin down, outside the wide receiver, he's scoring 6 points a game, right? Fantasy points per game. How in the world where Sam Howell has thrown more passes, 509, and completed more passes than any other quarterback in the NFL are both Terry McLaurin and Deshaun Watson not dominant pieces on fantasy teams. It's a baffling mystery. So I'm looking for other options if at all possible, but I do get it. Like, if you're looking for a chance, if you're buying into the squeaky wheel theory, he was squeaking, but it was a week removed. They had a bye week to sit down and sort it out.
Yeah, well, maybe he squeaked for 2 weeks. That's even more squeaks. So who knows? Jaden Reed, he's a little bit banged up. Keep tabs on his status. I'm in love with this kid, man. $4,900. He's like mini Debo. I love him. But keep tabs on his status. The fades, Jalen Waddle against the Jets at $7,400. DJ Moore, I mean, $6,900 for a wide receiver in Cleveland, Bob. I mean, that's
with a bum
tough,
ankle,
man.
Started out with
did
not practice on Wednesday.
Bargains at tight end. We'll start off with Tucker Kraft against the Bucks. We're going really cheap here at $3,000. And then Chigakonkwo, who's not putting up great numbers, but they've been more respectable lately against the Texans at $2,900. The fades, again, I'm going against the Bear because of the Browns matchup in Cleveland, $4,500 for Cole Kmet. And Kyle Pitts was good last week. Don't chase the points. $4,000 against the Panthers is too rich for my Italian blood. Let's get into the stardoms and situms for the week, Robert.
Let's do it.
It's the playoffs, pal. It's nut cutting time. So we want to make sure that we're making the correct decisions. I have Brock Purdy as my start of the week at quarterback.
Has to be.
The Cardinals are giving up about 18 points per game to quarterbacks this season. Purdy beat him for 2 touchdowns and over 21 in week 4. Matt Stafford, who is going to be the chalkiest chalk play of every chalk play that's ever been a chalk play against the Commanders, which means he's probably going to stink. The Commanders have been awful against quarterbacks. Almost every quarterback they've faced has scored over 20 points, including Tommy DeVito and Tyrod Taylor. This is a great matchup for Stafford. In that same game, Sam Howell. Over the last 4 weeks, the Rams have allowed 8 touchdowns and more than 20 points per game to quarterbacks. I like Howell this week as well. Jordan Love, I know he stunk last week. I don't care. That was last week. I'm still playing him against the Buccaneers. They've allowed 6 total scores and an average of 18.5 points to quarterbacks over the last 4 weeks. I also like Russell Wilson this week against Detroit, Bob. What are your thoughts on some of those players?
I like, it's between Purdy and Stafford as the start of the week, right? Everyone against the Commanders, and they've given up 9 touchdown passes. Since week 11? That's pretty good.
Yeah, they've been giving it up. Yep.
Yeah. So, and I agree with you on Love. I think, especially for me in DFS, in tournaments, people are going to be off him. And that's one of the things you look for in the large field tournaments is players coming off disappointing outings. And certainly his outing was disappointing against the Giants. So I'm looking for a big rebound there as well. And I do like Russell Wilson. I think he's been quietly very solid.
That could be a fun game in Detroit. And that's on Saturday night. Remember, guys, we got 3 games on Saturday this week. So make sure you're paying attention. The NFL is going to dominate the rest of the week, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Quarterbacks to sit or beware of. Kyler Murray against the Niners. Only Jalen Hurts has beaten them for more than 15.3 points in a game since week 10. They're a hot team right now. I love Kyler. I love that the Cardinals are wearing the all whites. Those remind me of the Neil Lomax days, but I'm not going there with Kyler. I've got Patrick Mahomes on the list, but he's still in my top 8 quarterbacks. So here's my thought process, okay? There are certain quarterbacks that you could start over Mahomes. Mahomes is not the be-all, end-all, elite, must-start quarterback anymore. He's not, okay? He has scored fewer than 16.9 points in all but one of his last 6 games. During that time, he's averaging 14.3 points. In 2 of the last 3 weeks where he has played, and so has Tommy DeVito, DeVito has outscored him. The Patriots have allowed fewer than 13 points at home to Tua, Hurts, and Justin Herbert this year. Bob, everybody in the fantasy industry talks about following the process, trusting the process. I'll follow it. I don't trust it. I'm following the process here. Give me an argument for why Patrick Mahomes should be started over Brock Purdy, Dak Prescott, maybe even Sam Howell and Matthew Stafford?
There is no argument for the first two. You're starting the first two ahead of them. I won't give you an argument. So I guess I'm a big
What about
believer in
Stafford, though? What about Stafford?
I think it's a great matchup. So here's the thing. I'm a big proponent of divorcing the name from the numbers, looking purely at the numbers. If you're doing that, there is not much argument for not playing Stafford this week, right? But there's also, when you remove the name from the equation, you remove the history from the equation, and you remove the circumstances from the equation. You just look at the raw numbers, and there's, Patrick Mahomes has a bit of a track record in recent years of high-end production. So, I think you're counting on that. But if you're sitting there and you're trying to be objective about it, you can make arguments for all four of those players you mentioned. But the first two, for me, are locked in ahead of Mahomes. I ranked them ahead of Mahomes this week, and Stafford's damn close. So it's a tough decision. A lot of times, I've talked about this here before, but you build a depth chart, or I build a depth chart, just like an NFL team does. And I try to stick with it, because over the course of time, varying from playing your best players, you're playing hunches, and, it tends to not work out. In this case, when you look at Mahomes' numbers over the course of the season, you named it there. The points per game is something I pay a lot of attention to.
Yep.
And in this case, Mahomes and that offense in general has not been as good. They're going to be down Isaiah Pacheco, it seems. They've bet their money on Pat Mahomes being able to create a wide receiver one. That formula has not yet come to fruition. So they may need to make some adjustments over the offseason. In the meantime, we may have to make some of the adjustments you said, as you point out, on your lineup decisions.
I've got Stafford ranked ahead of him. I tried to pick Stafford up. I have Mahomes in one league. It's the Allison Chains League. I made the playoffs, and I'm going to get beat by Jerry Cantrell this week because I'm losing everybody. I lost Jonathan Taylor. I've lost Ramondre Stevenson. Go ahead and play the violin very slowly. Now I've lost Keenan Allen. And Mahomes has been my quarterback, and he's been lousy. And I tried to pick up Stafford. Somebody else got him. And I would have played Stafford happily over him. I can't. Desmond Ridder, don't chase the points this week. Tougher matchup against the Panthers. Baker, Mayfield, Gardner Minshew, also guys I wouldn't chase the points on. And I'd beware Tua this week, as we mentioned, against the Jets. And again, keep in mind, there could be some weather here down in South Florida over the weekend. So that would hurt Tua's value even more. Bob, let's move on to the running backs. And Ezekiel Elliott is my start of the week. He saw elite level usage last week. Elite level usage. 66% of New England's touches last week went to Zeke. The Chiefs just gave up 25 points to James Cook. I feel good about Zeke this week against the Chiefs. Bob, what about you?
I do as well. Funny, if you're out there looking at the injury reports, Ramondre Stevenson shows up on the official NFL injury report as a limited participant. If you go to the Patriots website and you read the coverage of the local media, he did not practice. So if you were thinking, oh, maybe there's a chance, it doesn't seem likely we'll see Ramondre Stevenson. So I'm all on board as long as that's the case.
I like David Montgomery against the Broncos this week. They've been better lately. They just did give up 21 points to Eckler. You're going to start Gibbs as well, obviously. Najee Harris popped up on the injury report with a knee, but he seems like he's good to go. He's got the Colts this week. They've allowed 15-plus points to running backs 10 times this year. So I like Najee to bounce back from a couple of stinkers. Bob, thoughts on DeAndre Swift? Because DeAndre Swift has been hot trash from a fantasy perspective. I don't know why the Eagles aren't using him more, but Seattle's been awful against running backs. 16 total touchdowns allowed, 5th fewest points allowed. Are you starting DeAndre Swift?
Has he turned into the Patrick Mahomes of running backs? The early season run was fantastic, and the workload is not horrible, but man, the results haven't been great. He's not the top goal line asset for this team. It's Jalen Hurts, so that puts a little cap on him. And also, Kenneth Gainwell gets some fortuitous touches.
Yeah.
He's not a must start for me. I do like the matchup, and there's something to be said for that. But man, I'm looking at my options off really closely.
I got to play him in a couple leagues. I have no choice. I'm just hoping that he pops. Also like Jerome Ford against the Bears. Their defense has given up the 10th most points to runners, including the most points to receivers at the running back position, and Ford can catch the ball out of the backfield. The Siddums, and there's some big names on this list and some names that people are going to have to play, but you're not going to like the results. At least that's what we're projecting through following and trusting the process. Ken Walker against the Eagles. Ken Walker had 9.4 points last week. He's losing touches and snaps to Zach Charbonnet. The Eagles have allowed 4 touchdowns all year to running backs and the 2nd fewest points. Your thoughts on Javonte Williams? Because He had a really good game last week, which is going to make it hard to sit him. I get it. But Detroit's allowed the 4th fewest points to running backs and the 2nd fewest rushing yards per game allowed.
I'm still, especially this time of year, sure volume or certain volume is a rarity. You're going to get that with Javonte Williams. He doesn't always get the fortuitous opportunities. The goal line looks and so that's been a little bit of an issue. But I'll play him based on volume. I don't know that I'm going to have a ton of better options on my rosters.
James Conner in his last game against the Steelers went off in a revenge narrative. He's got the Niners this week, though. The last time he played San Francisco, 6.6 points. I mean, he's a shaky flex at best. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, if Pacheco can't go. I mean, he got some volume. I mean, he led the Chiefs backfield in touches and snaps, but I mean, the snaps were real close. McKinnon scored a touchdown. I don't know if I can trust Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and the Patriots defense is still very good. Devin Singletary against the Titans. Yes, he was the lead guy last week. He'll be the lead guy this week. We don't know because that thing is a nightmare to predict. But the Titans have been really tough against running backs at home. Only 2 touchdowns and the 2nd fewest points allowed to the enemy backs. So Devin Singletary is certainly a risk for us this week, Bob. Let's move on to wide receivers. And at wide receiver, we've got a lot of injuries. Bob and I have talked about it, right? So we're not going to have Keenan Allen this week. Obviously, that stinks. Nico Collins is banged up. We've already lost Tank Dell. Tyreek is banged up. Just depressing as hell. So you're going to have to dance with the guys who brung you. And Puka Nacua, to a degree, has brung you. Now, he has scored single digits in 3 of his last 6 games, so he's been inconsistent. But, dude, I mean, Commanders, they've given up the 2nd most points to wide receivers over the last 4 weeks, including 6 touchdowns. Cooper Kupp is an obvious play. He's been back the last couple of weeks, played pretty well. But Puka is going to be in the mix. I've got Zay Flowers on this list, Bob. He has had 2 straight 20-point games. Yep. The Jaguars have allowed 4th most points to wide receivers over the last 4 weeks, including 5 touchdowns. Where do you have Zay Flowers ranked this week?
I have him high-end wide receiver too. I think for the reasons you stated, and the deep game is starting to work a little bit for Baltimore. And so, maybe that means a little more for Odell Beckham, but that opens things up more for Zay Flowers, and we've seen the results of that in recent weeks.
Dude, I got to be honest with you. There's some wide receivers that are maybe not under the radar, but certainly not must starts or hell haven't even been owned in 50% of leagues. Odell Beckham Jr. in that game is one of them. Yep. Marcus Robinson in that Commanders game is another because
15 targets over the last 2 weeks.
Is hurt. Yep. We talked about Terry McLaurin in the bargains portion of the program. The Rams are tied for the 6th most wide receiver points allowed over the last 4 weeks. I'm sticking with McLaurin. Cortland Sutton's been a touchdown machine 10 times in 13 games. The Lions have allowed 15 touchdowns to wide receivers and a 63.4% catch rate. So I like Cortland Sutton. I like Tyler Lockett this week, Bob. And Tyler Lockett is inconsistent as hell. He'll drive you absolutely mad. You'll be pulling your hair out. Well, maybe not you, but people who have hair. Waiting for that. Tyler Lockett. But I like the matchup against the Eagles. They've given up 23 touchdowns, 47.7 fantasy points per game to wide receivers. I mean, geez Louise.
Right. I feel like you don't have to worry. I feel like you don't have to worry if it's Drew Lock and Geno Smith doesn't make it back. Right. We saw some evidence last week, and in fact, Lockett was the apple of his eye.
Yep. So DK goes without saying, Tyler Lockett's in the mix. Rashee Rice, I also like this week. We talked about Jaden Reed. Sit 'em wide receivers. Chris Godwin, who had his best game last week in a while, and he had like 12 points. I mean, is that his ceiling right now? He's been great. He's got a lot of touchdowns. He's got the Packers this week. They've allowed the 9th fewest points to wide receivers. Godwin's a risky flex. T. Higgins has been one of the biggest disappointments in fantasy football this season. The Vikings have allowed 1 touchdown to a wide receiver in the last 4 weeks, including the 6th fewest points. So T. Higgins is a risk. Bob, what are you thinking about Adam Thielen this week? Last week he was okay. He was okay. He wasn't great, but Atlanta's been really tough on wide receivers, and they had Thielen to 3.2 points in week 1. Are you starting him?
I prefer not to. And I think you probably have options. Adam Thielen was a guy we drafted as probably a wide receiver 5 in most of the leagues you're in. And there were, I want to thank him for his service. He was phenomenal. There have been stretches of the season where he's been indispensable. He's not that right now. And some of that seems to be tied to like the difference between Frank Reich and Thomas Brown as the play caller has been pretty noticeable too. Thomas Brown in there now calling the plays, and those haven't been his great games. So last week was okay though. But yeah, I think in general, I'm trying to avoid.
I don't love Jordan Addison this week either, Bob. I mean, He's
don't think
filled
he's hit.
for more than 11 points in 5 straight games. 3 of those games have been single digits. Justin Jefferson's expected to play. The Bengals are tough against the perimeter. So Addison's hard to trust right now. Gabe Davis is like, this guy is an anomaly wrapped in an enigma, surrounded by a mystery. Like, he either scores no points or 20. Like, his differential is insane. He's got my beloveds this week. They're giving up 90 yards per game to perimeter receivers. It could be a high-scoring game, Bob. I mean, do you roll the dice on Gabe Davis or no?
Well, I think that's the key there. Maybe you get to that point of the week, you'll know whether you need a home run play or just need to avoid the zero. If you're just needing to avoid a zero, Gabe Davis might not be your ideal choice, but he is a pretty good swing for the fence play.
All right, moving on to tight end. And folks, I struggled to put in stardom and sit him tight ends this week because the position is just garbage. It's a dumpster fire. Sam Laporta is an obvious start, but I put him as the start of the week. Why? Well, because the position's awful. It's either an obvious start or a horrible start. The Broncos are bad against tight ends. They've given up the second most points to the position. So even though Laporta has scored single digits in 3 of his last 5 games, I'm playing him. That's obvious. David Njoku against the Bears. They've given up 10 plus points to tight end 7 times and a 78.3% catch rate. Giddy up. And boy, do we love Joe Flacco being under center. Dallas Goedert, Bob, let's talk about him. He has failed to score double digits in 4 of his last 5 games, including games before he came back from the forearm injury. But Seattle's given up 9 or more points to tight ends 5 times in the last 7 weeks. Goddard has not been great. Tight end is not great. I mean, is he still a top 10 option?
Yeah, he's definitely a top 10 option. I mean, he's been a potent offense and has a semi-favorable matchup. I think maybe we'll see his usage normalize a little bit. I think ideally this is passing attack's going to run through 3 people. And it's going to be AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, and Dallas Goedert to a degree. So I do think they like using him. I'll go ahead and keep playing that.
Isaiah Likely, who we told you to play last week, had a very good game. I don't think he's going to go and put up 19 again. But, I mean, he's got the Jaguars. They've given up 20-plus points to two tight ends in the last 5 weeks. So I like Isaiah Likely. If you're looking for some, under-the-radar type of plays, Logan Thomas has got a good matchup against the Rams. We talked about Chigakonko and Tucker Kraft as potential bargains in DFS as well. Now, the sit-em tight ends. Again, Bob, this is a hard thing to analyze because some of the guys that I have as sit-ems are probably going to be in lineups because the position's so thin. I'll start off on Hunter Henry, who scored 2 touchdowns on his birthday last week. But I don't like him against the Chiefs, Bob. They haven't allowed a tight end to score more than 11.7 points in a game, and only 3 tight ends have scored double digits. So think about that. Only 3 guys have gone over the single-digit mark against the Chiefs, and the highest point total that they've given up is 11.7. Thoughts on Hunter Henry?
I think back beyond last game to the 3-week run of the Patriots offense where they lost, 3 games by a combined total of 26 to teams that scored 26 points combined. Yeah. That was a all-time historic low in scoring for them. So yeah, I don't need to push any Patriot receiving asset into my lineup until I have further evidence that Bailey Zappe's going to toss 3 touchdowns a game.
Yeah, and that's unlikely. Cole Kmet, who, again, I mean, you probably got to play him. I understand that. But, and I know the Browns just got smoked by Evan Ingram last week, but still, they have allowed fewer than 6 points at home to George Kittle, Pat Freiermuth, Trey McBride. Their defense is good. I mean, Ingram had a massive game last week. Christian Kirk is out, and they just targeted him a lot more. So I'm a little worried about Cole Kmet. Pat Freiermuth, he had that big game against the Bengals a few weeks ago, and then since then he's been awful. And now he's got the Colts. No tight end has beaten them for more than 11.4 points. So tight ends have a low ceiling against Indianapolis. So keep that in mind with Freiermuth. And then I mentioned Kyle Pitts as a fade in DFS. Kyle Pitts had a good game last week, 14.7 points, but he had been held to single digits in the previous 6. And the last time he played the Panthers, he had 6.4 points. Bob, thoughts on any of these 3, Pitts, Freiermuth, and Cole Kmet, who all are very startable assets in fantasy, but I just don't love the matchups. All
will be started in multiple lineups. So for that reason, right? You're playing the role more than you're playing the production, and you're hoping the production follows the role. And in Pitt's case, I mean, he's more a wide receiver. The kind of where he's playing and how they use him is more like a wide receiver than tight end. And they have a really good wide receiver, one that's got a little more upside to me in Drake London. So that's my concern. But I think your overall assessment is correct. You're not going to have a lot of better options. I do like, you keep mentioning Okonkwo. The Texans really super favorable matchup. For the tight end. So Chig Okonkwo will never be what we all drafted him to be. Maybe he will be next year. I don't know. We tend to be a few years early. Look, I'm still waiting for Juwan Johnson to turn into that guy.
Yeah,
and I've been drafting him for 3 years,
that,
right?
that
So,
pumpkin ain't turning into a carrot.
Right. It doesn't always happen for these guys, these athletic tight ends that we see. And, so be mindful of that before you press some of these players that maybe don't have as great of matchups, but do have locked in roles.
Remember, folks, again, we've got Thursday Night Football, Chargers, Raiders. You've got 3 games on Saturday. Vikings, Bengals, which, boy, I mean, if the injuries weren't such a mess, that would have been a great game. Cousins and Jefferson against Burrow and Chase. Now we got Mullins against Browning, but I mean, not that Browning's been bad, but it's still not Joe Burrow. The late afternoon game is Steelers, Colts. The night game is Broncos, Lions. All these games are on NFL Network, so make sure you're getting those lineups set for Saturday. Bob, first week of the postseason, any final thoughts here for the fantasy managers out there looking to advance?
Well, this is the time of year where we do start outsmarting ourselves, where you heard our discussion on Patrick Mahomes. I don't know that we're actually outsmarting ourselves there, but there'll be decisions similar to that where you'll be tempted to play hunches. Just remember, they're your hunches. You have to live with them if they don't work out, and don't overplay bad situations. So like weather. Look at last week, Fabs. I mean, the weather was horrible in Baltimore and New York. Zach Wilson is AFC Player of the Week after having one of his best games. Lamar Jackson had a huge game. Football is designed to be played in the winter. It's a winter sport. And also, you could think the same about matchups. I think just mentally, as we head into the playoffs and the games are more important as well, we blow these things up a little more in our minds. So assess your options carefully. Try to be sober about your assessments of what's happening and don't overthink. Just react.
And by the way, even if you have a bye this week, you should be on the waiver wire.
Yep.
Go and check the matchups for the defenses if you don't have an elite defense, like the Broncos. I believe in week 16, they play, I want to say it might be the Jets at home, or no, the Patriots at home. It's a great matchup. The Broncos are not a team that people are picking up off the waiver wire this week because they're playing the Lions. But if you have a bye, pick up the defenses. If you stream kickers, look ahead at the matchups. Like, don't sit on your hands. Make sure you're doing that kind of thing. Because, dude, we're going for the gusto here. We want to grab that golden ring. We want to have that championship belt around our waist, right? Which Bob Harris has many of. He actually likes to walk around the house with the belt and nothing else. That's another story altogether. We hope you guys have enjoyed this week's edition of the Believe Fantasy Football Show presented by Bet Online. For our Kai behind the virtual glass toss, for Bob Harris, the man, the myth, the legend, the busiest man in fantasy football. I am Fabs. Good luck in week 15. Hopefully you guys take home that first round victory, and we'll see you here again next week.